The road up to Black Ridge was half frozen mud, half broken stone, and the horse didn't want any part of it. Clara Marsh didn't blame her. The wagon lurched sideways on the third switchback, a hard lurch, the kind that came from something giving way all at once, not wearing down slow. The left rear wheel dropped 6 inches and stuck. Clara felt it through the seat boards before she heard it a deep crack, then the groan of wood taking weight it wasn't meant to hold. She climbed down without hurrying. The axle had snapped clean through, not worn clean. The brake was pale and dry at the center, the way wood looked when a saw had gone most of the way through and left just enough fiber to hold until the weight came down hard. She crouched there a long time looking at it. Down the hill, Oakhaven spread out in the valley fog. A handful of figures stood at the edge of the main road. A few had field glasses up to their faces. Clara stood. She went to the rear of the wagon and took stock. A trunk of clothes. 2 crates, one with her mother's cast-iron pot, one with flour and coffee going stale. A bedroll. 1 axe. No spare axle. No rope worth a damn. She pulled her skirt up at the back seam and tore. 12 inches of fabric straight off, enough to kneel in without tangling. The slope above the road had stones, granite, the kind that didn't move unless you made them. She went up and chose 3 flat enough to stack, heavy enough to brace, carried them down one by one. Her palms split on the second trip where the edge bit sharp, but she didn't look at her hands. She worked the largest stone under the axle housing, angling it for purchase. Tested it. Shifted it 2 inches right. The wagon didn't move. She needed more weight on the lever, more length. She was looking up the ridge line, reading the tree line for something that wouldn't flex when she heard it. Not quite footsteps. More like something very large choosing deliberately to make itself known. He came out of the tree line the way a storm came, no warning, no announcement. Just suddenly there and taking up more space than seemed right. 6.5 feet of him, maybe more. A beard that had given up being trimmed. A scar running from his left jaw down into his collar. Silas Crane. Every person in Oakhaven knew the name. Most wouldn't say it out loud after dark. He stopped 10 feet away and looked at the axle. Then at the stones she'd placed. Then at her hands. He didn't say anything. She didn't step back. "I need weight on the long end of that board," she said. Her voice came out flat and level. "Lift the housing clear so I can reset the wheel on the axle pin. Won't hold long, maybe 20 minutes, but I only need it to hold to the top." He looked at her. "I can't pay you money," she said. "I have half a pound of coffee left. You can have it." The field glasses down in Oakhaven were still up. She didn't look their direction. Silas walked to the wagon. He didn't crouch, didn't test the ground, didn't take a breath first. He got his hands under the housing and lifted. The axle came up 3 inches, clean and steady. Clara moved stone wood pin brace. Her fingers worked by feel because she didn't have the angle to see. When the wheel settled back onto the pin, with a sound like a rifle bolt sliding home, she stood and stepped clear. Silas lowered the wagon. He hadn't made a sound the whole time. She took the coffee tin from the crate and set it on the road between them. He looked at it. "Half a pound," she said. He picked it up and walked back into the trees without speaking. The forest closed around him like water over a stone. Clara climbed back onto the seat. Her hands left red prints on the reins. She did not look at Oakhaven. She clicked the horse forward and started up the last stretch of road to the top of the ridge where the trees thinned and the wind came off the mountain like a blade, and nothing grew that hadn't learned to live on almost nothing. The first snow came early that year, not the soft kind that settled quiet, but the kind that blew sideways off the ridge and found every gap in every board. Clara had 3 boards loose on the north wall. She plugged them with strips of wool cut from her second dress and told herself it would hold. It held 4 days. Then the wind changed direction, and the wool came through onto the floor in a wet heap at 2 in the morning, and she lay there listening to the cold come in, and did the arithmetic again. Firewood, maybe 12 days if she burned small. Food flour enough for 2 weeks of flat bread thin. A quarter jar of salt pork. Coffee she'd already rationed down to a half cup at morning. She needed seeds for spring. She needed a proper spade. She needed nails. She went down to Oakhaven on the 6th day. The man at the feed store didn't meet her eyes. He kept wiping the same spot on his counter while she waited. "I can't sell to you," he finally said. Quiet. Almost sorry. "Why?" "Vance's order." She stood there long enough that he started wiping a different spot. Then she walked to the hardware. Same answer. The dry goods. Same. The woman at the back of the dry goods store watched her go with a look Clara recognized, not cruelty, just the particular exhaustion of people who'd already decided the cost of standing up was too high. She walked back up the mountain. The spade she had was broken at the socket. The blade flopped sideways when she drove it in. She used it anyway, both hands gripping just below the brake, working the edge of the granite shelf east of the cabin where the ground was softer. She was making a cold cellar. Not the kind anyone would choose to make, barely 4 feet wide, the ceiling low enough she had to work on her knees, but deep enough to hold a temperature once the earth closed over it. She hit rock every third stroke, set it aside, hit rock again. Her right palm had a split across the base of the thumb that opened every morning and closed every night into a thin, dark line she stopped noticing. The first thing appeared at the fence line on the 9th day. She almost missed it, just a shape in the gray pre-dawn dropped against the bottom rail. 2 rabbits, dressed already tied together with a strip of rawhide. The snow around the post had 1 set of boot prints going in and 1 going out, both already beginning to fill. She looked at them a long time. She took them inside. That night, she ate the first real meal she'd had in 10 days. While the bones simmered, she found the worst of Silas's 2 coats she'd seen him in it, the day they'd met a canvas shell with a lining that had given up somewhere around the elbows, and she stitched it by firelight. Not fancy. Honest work. Every stitch pulled tight the way her grandmother had taught her, the kind that didn't let go in a wind. She left it at the fence post before first light, with a square of cornbread wrapped in cloth. The cornbread was small. It was also the last of the flour. The next morning the coat was gone, and there was a hand axe leaning against the post, the edge freshly ground, and 3 pounds of dried venison in a cloth sack. She picked up the axe and felt the balance of it. Good steel. Better than anything she could have bought. She went back to the cellar and dug until dark. On the 14th day, her blade caught something that didn't sound like rock. It rang faintly, but it rang a tone that moved up through the handle and into her wrists. She crouched down and scraped with her fingers. A vein of something ran through the granite face wider than her hand, catching what little light came down from the opening above. Wrong color for iron. Wrong color for anything she knew by name. The wind came up hard from the north. She had 2 hours of daylight left and no time for curiosity she couldn't afford. She drove the blade in at the next seam and kept digging. She smelled it before she saw it. Wood smoke, but wrong. Not the tight, controlled smell of a hearth. The loose, wasteful smell of something burning that wasn't meant to burn. Clara came up out of sleep, already moving. She hit the door with her shoulder and got it open, and the cold drove into her like a fist. The woodpile was on the east side of the cabin, stacked 6 feet high against the lean-to wall. She and Silas had spent 11 days building it. She had counted the logs twice because counting them made her feel like the winter was a problem with a solution. It was all burning, not smoldering. Burning full and bright and tall, throwing orange light across the snow and into the black tree line, and she could see where the base had been soaked with something, because the bottom logs burned hotter than the top, and the heat came off it in a wall that stopped her 10 feet out. She stood in her wool socks in the snow and watched it. The cold was below zero. She could feel it pulling the moisture from her lips from the inside of her nose. The fire was beautiful, the way disasters were beautiful, when they were already finished, and there was nothing left to do but witness them. She went back inside. She sat on the edge of the cot and looked at her hands. The split on her right palm had opened again. She pressed it closed with her thumb and looked at the wall. 12 days to the end of November. After that, the passes would close. The temperature at the top of Black Ridge in December could kill a man in 3 hours if he stopped moving. Without wood, the cabin would reach outside temperature before morning. She knew this the way she knew her own name. She didn't move for almost a minute. Then she picked up the pickaxe. The cellar entrance was 4 feet wide and dropped straight down 6 feet before it opened into the chamber she'd carved out. She'd been avoiding the far wall, the one with the vein that rang when she struck it, because she'd told herself she had more important things. She didn't have more important things anymore. She dropped down into the hole. The dark was total. She worked by feel, the way she'd learned to do most things. The pickaxe head connected with the far wall, and she felt the ring come up through the steel into her palms, into her wrists, into her elbows. She swung again. The ring was higher this time, cleaner. She didn't know how long she worked. Long enough that her shoulders stopped burning and went numb. Long enough that the sounds she was making stopped sounding like work and started sounding like something else, like a woman who had run out of other options and was fighting the earth itself because the earth was the only thing left to fight. The pickaxe head broke through into a small cavity, and she lost her footing and went to one knee. Her hand hit the rock face and she felt something different. Not cold granite, something smoother. She pressed her palm flat against it. The texture was fine. The grain ran horizontal, and under the thin layer of limestone dust, something caught even the absent light and gave it back. She scraped with her thumbnail. Her hand started shaking. Not from cold. She was still crouched there, both hands flat on the wall of the cellar, when the rope dropped down from above. Then a lantern on a second rope. The light came down and filled the space, and Clara did not move and did not speak and did not look up. Heavy boots landed behind her. She heard him take one breath. She heard what that breath did when he saw what the lantern showed on the wall, a seam running 8 feet across, finger-thick in places, fat as a man's wrist, in others yellow-white and unmistakable. "Get up," Silas said. His voice was rough, not cruel. She didn't move. One large hand closed around her arm just above the elbow, and pulled not hard, just steady, the way you moved something that had been still too long and needed reminding. It could still move. "You don't get to die tonight," he said. He lifted her up out of the hole. The storm hit them both. He didn't let go of her arm. Inside his cabin, the stove was going. She sat next to it and looked at the wall, and her hands slowly stopped shaking and started bleeding again instead, which was better, which meant they were warm. Outside, the blizzard arrived in full. They came up the mountain at mid-morning, when the storm had thinned enough to ride through, but the cold still had teeth. Clara heard the horses before she saw them. She was in her cabin, rebuilt firestone hearth Silas had mortared together through the night, using rocks pulled from the cellar wall, the same wall, and she heard the particular sound of men who expected to find nothing and were taking their time about it. She counted the hoofbeats. 6 horses. She stood up and took the Winchester down from the wall pegs. Loaded it the way her father had shown her, smooth, no-wasted movement, the same way you did anything you might need to do again fast. Then she sat back down in the chair by the fire. The door came open, boots first. The man who kicked it wasn't Elias, just one of his, a wide man in a good coat, who clearly hadn't been told there would be a fire inside. He stopped in the doorway, and the cold poured in around him, and he stood there long enough that the men behind him ran up against his back. Then Elias Vance stepped around him. He was dressed for a funeral. Long wool coat, black. Hat he didn't take off when he came inside. He had a leather satchel under one arm, and the expression of a man who'd already written the last page of a story and come to read it aloud. His eyes went to the fire first, then the iron pot hanging over it, the smell of venison and juniper coming off the broth. Then the bearskin across Clara's shoulders, black fur, a full hide draped like she'd been born wearing it. Then the rifle across her knees. His expression didn't break. Men like Elias Vance were good at that. "Mrs. Marsh," he said. "Mr. Vance." We were concerned. He looked around the cabin, slowly cataloging. "Given the storm." "That's kind." He opened the satchel and produced a folded paper. Set it on the table between them like it was something he was doing her a favor by delivering. "Tax assessment. Property liens on this parcel go back 3 years before your husband took deed. Outstanding balance of $512. He smoothed the paper flat with 2 fingers. Payable by sundown today. Clara looked at the paper. She didn't touch it. "That's a lot of money," she said. "It is." He almost smiled. "There's a simpler path, of course. Sign the parcel back to the county land office. I sit on that board, as you know, and we'll call the debt settled. You'd have safe passage down to Oakhaven. A warm room." The fire popped, a knot of pine releasing its pitch. "A warm room," she said. "Clara." He let the familiarity sit there like a hand on a shoulder she hadn't offered. "You're one woman alone on a mountain in December. There's no shame in—" "I'm not alone." The voice came from the corner of the room. The wide man by the door stepped back into the man behind him. Elias turned, and his face did something, then a small collapse just around the eyes, because the shadow in the corner was very large and had always been there, and none of them had seen it. Silas stepped into the firelight. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He stood behind Clara's chair with the specific stillness of something that had decided, and the deciding was already finished. Elias recovered. He was good at that too. "Crane." A short nod, the kind you gave a dog you weren't sure about. "This is a county matter. Nothing to do with—" Silas set his hand on the back of Clara's chair, not on her shoulder. On the chair, one hand resting easy. Elias stopped talking. The fire breathed. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like a river. Clara let the silence hold exactly as long as she wanted it to. Then she picked up the deed paper with 2 fingers folded at once and set it back on the table face down. $512, she said. "By sundown." "That's correct." She looked at him with an expression that had no anger in it, no fear, nothing he could catch hold of. "Then you'd better stay close," she said. "It won't take long." Elias laughed. It was a short laugh, the kind that did the work of a longer cruelty. He looked at the men behind him, making sure they'd heard it too. The wide man in the good coat obliged with a grin. "By sundown," Elias said again, slower, like she hadn't understood the first time. Clara stood up. She set the Winchester against the chair, not down, just aside, still within reach, and crossed to the table. She moved the deed paper to the edge without looking at it. Then she looked at Elias the way she'd looked at that broken axle on the road in October. Reading it, deciding what it would take. "You want to see it first?" she said. Or you want to keep standing there?" Elias's chin came up a quarter inch. That was all, but she saw it. "See what?" he said. She walked to the cellar door in the floor. It was a new door. Silas had fitted it 2 nights ago, pine boards, tight-joined iron hinges. She pulled it open, and the smell came up cold earth mineral sharp, something under it that had no name she knew yet. She went down without a lantern. She didn't need one now. She knew the wall by its sound, by the way the air changed 2 feet before she reached it. She knew the vein the way she knew the split on her palm, by the specific weight of it in the dark. She came back up with both hands cupped together. She set what she carried on the table in front of Elias Vance. 3 pieces. The largest was the size of a hen's egg, irregular one face of it sheared clean where the pickaxe had separated it from the seam. The color was wrong for iron, wrong for copper, wrong for anything that came out of ordinary ground. In the flat winter light through the cabin window, it sat on the table and it pulled the eye. The way fire pulled the eye, not because it moved, but because something in it seemed like it wanted to. Nobody in the room spoke. Elias reached for the largest piece. "Don't." His hand stopped. He looked up at Clara. The Winchester was back in her hands. She hadn't made a sound picking it up. She held it level, not dramatic, the stock easy against her shoulder. The barrel pointed at the center of the table, not at Elias, but the distance between those 2 things was short, and everyone in the room understood it. "You'll want to keep your hands where I can see them," she said. From behind her chair, Silas moved for the first time since the men had arrived. He crossed to the corner where his coat hung on its peg, reached into the inside pocket, and came back with a leather bag the size of a man's fist. He didn't hurry. He set it on the table next to the 3 pieces of raw ore and pulled the drawstring. The bag tipped. Gold, not dust, not flake. Rough nuggets, irregular, the kind that came out of a primary seam before any water had time to work them smooth. They caught the firelight and threw it back doubled, and the wide man by the door made a sound low in his throat that he probably didn't know he'd made. Silas pushed the bag across the table toward the deed paper. He didn't touch Elias. He didn't need to. "Count it," Clara said. "Take what you're owed. Write a receipt. Sign it with the county seal you've got in that satchel." She kept the rifle where it was. "Then fold the deed back up and leave it on the table when you go." Elias's face was doing something complicated. His eyes moved from the gold to the ore samples, to Clara, to Silas, and back to the gold. She watched him arrive at the number he was calculating, not $512, but what the vein implied. What it meant that she'd been up here alone in the cold, with a broken spade and no neighbors, and she'd walked out of the ground with this. His jaw tightened. "There's more," he said. "Not a question." "That's mine to know," Clara said. He looked at her for a long moment. She let him look. Then he sat down, opened the satchel, and started counting. Elias wrote the receipt slow, like a man who believed if he dragged the pen long enough, the numbers might change. They didn't change. He pressed the county seal into the wax himself, because Clara stood there with the rifle until he did, and when the wax cooled, she picked the deed up off the table and held it without looking at it. He stood. "This isn't finished," he said. "Yes, it is. A woman alone up here with a gold seam that size. There are men who'll come. Men worse than anything in Oakhaven." He said it like a warning. It came out like an admission. Clara looked at him. "I know." She crossed to the door and pulled it open. The wind came in hard and flat, carrying the smell of pine and deep cold. Outside, the empty coffin sat in the snow, where they'd left it, the wood already going gray-white with frost. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a silver coin, old, worn thin at the rim, a dime gone soft from years in someone's hand. She held it out. Elias looked at it. toll," she said, "for the road down." He stared at her face for a moment. Whatever he was looking for, he didn't find it. He took the coin because not taking it would have been worse, and he walked out the door, and his men went after him, without being told, and the wide man in the good coat went last and didn't look back. Clara watched them take the coffin. They tied it across one of the horses, because leaving it would have meant leaving something behind, and men like that couldn't stand to leave anything behind, even when it had already cost them everything. She watched until the horses were gone below the tree line. Then she pulled the door shut. The cabin was quiet, the way it was only after something loud had ended. Fire in the stone hearth broth still simmering, the deed on the table with the county seal pressed into the bottom corner. Outside the storm was easing, the wind dropping by degrees, the light through the single window going from white to pale gold as the clouds thinned. Silas was standing at the window with his back to her. She set the rifle on its pegs. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at the deed, and then at the cellar door in the floor, and then at the wall where she'd driven a nail to hold her mother's pot, before the pot went onto the fire, just a nail in raw wood, the only thing on the wall that was hers and only hers. "You could have stayed out of it," she said. "Let me handle it alone." "I know," he said. "Why didn't you?" He turned from the window. In the pale gold light, his face was a hard landscape, the scar, the beard, the eyes that had seen things he'd never named to anyone. But there was something else in them now, something that had been there since the night in the cellar, when he'd pulled her up out of the dark with both hands. Something he hadn't bothered to hide because hiding it would have cost more than he was willing to spend. "Wasn't going to let them take what you earned," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't need anyone to keep me alive," she said. "I've established that." "You have. And I don't need anyone to fight for me." "No." The fire settled. A log shifted, sending up a brief column of sparks that died before they reached the chimney. "What I need," Clara said, "is someone who can lay stone. Level it right, not just stack it. I need 2 more rooms before spring and a proper shaft down to the second level of that seam, and I can't do the timbering alone." Silas was quiet. "I'll pay fair wages," she said. "Or something close to fair. I still have half a pound of coffee." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The kind of thing a smile became in a man who'd forgotten how. "I don't want wages," he said. "Then what?" He looked at the deed on the table, at the cellar door, at the nail in the wall with nothing hanging from it. "A reason to stay on the mountain," he said. Clara picked up the deed and folded it once clean along the existing crease. She put it in her coat pocket. "That," she said, "I can manage." Outside Black Ridge stood, as it had always stood, stone and pine and cold and silence, and the particular quality of air at altitude that made everything feel both very far from the world below and exactly the right distance. The storm finished dying. The sky went clear and hard and blue, the kind of blue that only happened after a thing had been cleaned out completely. Inside the fire burned.